you raise a good point about ESG and sort of the global concatenation that involves, and it has not changed our bounded nature as situated human beings tied to distinct communities, communicating with preferred languages, and identifying with specific traditions and cultures. This is one place where I see like some possibility of free market people uniting with some of these more NatCon types, not on industrial policy, not on trade. We'll never agree on that, but on sort of the dehumanizing aspect of ESG. Even if you're an expat, a drifter, a vagabond, no matter how deracinated you've become, you still have your prejudices and partialities. A place that feels more like home than somewhere else, a language that's easier to speak, manners and mores that are more familiar, discrete groups with whom you would rather associate than others. And the ESG movement has its end global governance. If you put global governance in italics in Google, you'll see a link right away to the World Economic Forum. That's a term that they use, and it circulates widely in academic literature. You can go to libraries or Westlaw, LexisNexis, and these sort of academic search engines, and put in global governance and get a vast array of literature on it. And it involves the coordination between government and private finance, investing, and banking to stamp out cultural pluralism and institute a managerial system of grand standardization, including unified laws and regulations. And in the face of that, that overwhelming aspirational global governance, a human feels no agency. You don't feel that you have the facility to change, resist, or direct just the everyday elements of your jobs and careers. I think there's a psychic element to this that's just harmful, where people become isolated and they feel disempowered and insignificant by forces that are frankly just too powerful to oppose. And I think political decentralization is the answer to that, to minimize undue power and violence and to maximize individual liberty under just laws that govern a moral populace with mostly homogenous values. I don't think that's, in a pluralist context, I think you have to expect decentralized communities to have homogenous values. But, my thing has always been, the ideal society, because I love Murray Rothbard, but we're never going to, on this flawed planet, have an idealized anarcho-capitalist utopia. I'm very anti-utopian in my thinking. So my thing is, the best we can do is to try to maximize liberty under a system of order that involves as much voluntary participation as possible. We can never get uniform agreement among people. So we have to develop a society in which competing views can be accommodated, so long as force is not unduly exercised against other individual agents. And what does this look like? Well, it may differ in different places. I think it would be contextual, situational. You would have different forms of government at different areas, but the important thing is that the greater number of people have to be able to participate in it. It has to be a voluntary association, and it has to be something in which people have the freedom of exit. And right now, the nation states are so big and so powerful, and now they're working in this intergovernmental way, in this developing this concatenation in a way that just it marginalizes, it disenfranchises, it disempowers people, and people don't feel that they have participation. As much as these organizations talk about democracy, they aren't acting on it. They are using the masses, as it were, to consolidate and concentrate power and really make sure that a smaller group of elites are governing the rest of us.
There are some parallels there with what happened towards the end of the medieval church that we can see, right? So it's kind of like these excesses of power, excesses of bureaucracy, of regulation. They even had something kind of similar to carbon taxes, where they would actually charge you, okay, you'll have to pay this amount of money to be able to do this now. So there were more and more rules and more laws and regulations. But, thinking on the hopeful edge of things, that also was part of what led to its demise. Its stranglehold on having all of the authority kind of being broken down, because they basically just grew too big, too bloated, and too arbitrary, and people resented that. And I think that there is a parallel that we can draw to the way that the public feels about this oversized, bloated government that is seeking to acquire even more power and go even higher up and pair up with the biggest private organizations to move towards this world governance.
No, I think that's right. I mean, again, global governance seems to be the telos of this ESG movement to the extent that it has an end game. That is what the end game is. What is that going to ultimately look like? No one's been able to just draw it out. At some point, people will become disappointed because, as all human projects do, this one will ultimately not generate the utopia that is promised. So, that, and there is a religious element to it, even to this wokeness. It's sort of, there's a sense of atonement. The people that are taking a knee and essentially praying to whatever entity, the god of wokeness, it fills a vacuum in an increasingly secular society. It feels this need, and ESG in the same way. I think one reason why so many CEOs are buying into it is it has this sort of psychic benefit. It makes people feel good. Like before, they felt bad about making profits. They were like, well, I enjoy having money, but maybe it feels wrong. Now they can say, oh, I'm making profits and doing good. Never mind the fact that businesses do good by adding value to society, by producing goods and services at cheaper prices, by employing people, by making our lives easier and better. Business, as it traditionally existed, did good things, and profits were not bad. They were the rewards businesses got for making our lives better. But that just wasn't enough. It didn't provide the psychic benefit to these CEOs who existed in a pretty hostile culture, a culture that did not appreciate business as it traditionally was practiced.
Well, Alan, that's so interesting that you just brought that up, because Milton Friedman famously argued for that, right? The what was that piece called about basically going after profit was the best thing for business to do morally, or it wasn't morally his words. I forget what it was called, but I
think you're referring, I might be wrong, but I think you're referring to the 1973 New York Times article, but I can't recall the title of it. I don't recall the title.
Yes. Well, we'll pin it underneath here, but basically he argued that was the duty of business, and that consequentially people would actually be better off if businesses focused on profit. But I don't know if you were aware of this, but Klaus Schwab, back around that time, he wrote a response to Friedman.
Yeah, absolutely.
Saying that it was the opposite, right?
That's
what do you
exactly
know about that?
Well, yeah, he did, and he wasn't alone. In 2019, the Business Roundtable, which is basically a social networking group of very wealthy CEOs, purported to redefine the purpose of a corporation. That's how bold they were. We are purporting to redefine the purpose of business. And they expressly changed that purpose to shift from the shareholder model, that Friedman model, to the stakeholder model. And they said, this is what business is about from now on. And that is, first of all, it's the height of arrogance to purport to redefine a concept that has been worked out and hashed out over centuries. But second of all, it's dangerous to have people at that level issuing such a proclamation that flies in the face of most of our laws. I mean, most of our companies are incorporated in Delaware. Delaware has a traditional fiduciary duty model. It has the shareholder model embedded in its laws. We have ERISA. We have all kinds of different laws that are predicated on the shareholder model. So you're basically saying the purpose of business is to violate all law as we know it in the United States. That is a recipe for chaos.
And that's actually one of the reasons why, in many cases, ESG is not able to creep into the United States as much as it is in Europe, right?
I I think that's correct, and I think I think the Americans, for all our problems and for all the tumult in our country, are still very jealous of our rights and our sovereignty. And I think that Europeans, because of the aftermath of World War II, maybe to atone for their past, are more willing to forfeit their sovereignty to the end of some sort of supranational structure, something that is not nationalist. Now, I think that you're seeing a lot of backlash against that at the moment. I think you've got populism virtually everywhere, France, Italy, you name it. It's everywhere, and it's not just in Europe. And it's not just in the United States. It's in Latin America. We've got a wild election going on in both Guatemala and Argentina. I don't know if you've seen the
Yes,
the
I have seen.
Argentinian candidate who's like a radical anarcho-libertarian.
Pro
Exactly.
Bitcoin. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's happening in Asia. It's really happening everywhere. And I have no crystal ball. Who knows where this is headed? But I think decentralization is a solution that could lead to nonviolence. And I think our goal needs to be minimizing power and minimizing violence. And that's the best we can hope for, is a society in which power is checked, power is neutralized, and violence is minimized, because you can't get rid of those things. We're human beings. We are flawed creatures. We have fallible minds. We are wired to do certain things that are sometimes destructive of others. And we're never going to create a perfect world. So the best we can hope for is to create institutions that, again, minimize violence and neutralize power. You'll never get rid of those things, but you can try to minimize them to the extent possible.